welcome everybody from ourselves here at the TCI Network and MOC Asian Chapter Summer Conference 2022. And welcome to everybody, both listening and taking part live as we are now, and also who will be seeing this later in the recording. And I'd just like to welcome you all here. We will spend the next few minutes on introductions and a speech, short speech by a president of CAMED Business School, who, Casey Barnett. We are hosting this for the second year in succession. Could I just ask Patricia to say a few words of hello to everybody? And that, because my
thank you, Ken. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning for those who are in this side of the world. Very nice to be another year here collaborating with the MOC network and the TCI network, the more academic perspective and the more practical perspective together, joining forces for this conference. Really great. Thank you, Ken and Casey, for hosting again us in Cambodia and the platform. And to Tony Lin, of course, with the ITRI support, organizing the program and putting us together. So very nice to see you. This is our annual meeting point for the Asian chapters of TCI and MOC. I think it's good that once a year we bring together stories from Asia. In this case, so many things are happening in the world, so many disruptions, and so many things that we need to look at, and where clusters can play a prominent role, and collaboration is key to find solutions and to solve challenges together. This is what we are going to see today. We have two very interesting sessions that we will see during the day, with very interesting presentations and a fabulous keynote speaker, our founder in TCI, a member of our board of advisors, Michael Enright. So I hand over to you, Ken, for the welcomes. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Patricia. And before anything else, could I just say very briefly to everybody how we will be running the conference today, that we'll hand over in a second to the president of our school, and our keynote speaker after that, our Meruet will be talking a little bit on the TCI network. We will then ask our good friend Professor Michael Enright for his keynote speech on the future of collaboration. After that, we will probably not have a break, but we'll go straight into the first series of presentations, which I'll be chairing, and we'll have a good break before the second section. So that's running according to the program. Let me just say, if I could pass the floor to my good friend and colleague, Casey Barnett, who is the president of CAMED Business School here. Casey, could I ask you to for a few words of introduction? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ken. Patricia Valdenebro, CEI of TCI Network, Ken Charman, Chair of MOC Asian Chapter, Marie Daniel Nielsen, President TCI Network, keynote speaker, Professor Michael Enright of Northeastern University, distinguished speakers, presenters, welcome to the TCI Network and MOC Asian Chapter Summer Conference 2022. My name is Casey Barnett, and I am the president of CAMED Business School, an institute of higher education based in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. We are pleased to be supporting today's event and hosting today's event. At CAMED, we, as with many universities and institutes of higher education throughout the world, are now following outcomes-based education, where we start with identifying the intended achievements of our graduates and our students, and then working backwards to identify the skills required to make those achievements, and then the processes and activities for the students to develop those skills. The outcomes that we identify for our students as a business school include the establishment, management, and leadership of profitable businesses, creating shared value, which are sustainable. And with the emphasis on outcomes-based education, especially with outcomes in profitable, successful businesses, creating shared value, and being sustainable, your research, the research that you are sharing with us today, is important for us to clarify the achievable outcomes, as well as the context in which our graduates, the future generations, will be achieving those outcomes. And I would like to thank you very much for your hard work over the years and the months to conduct research, and especially we appreciate the research that today is based and focused on Asia. And on behalf of our students and our faculty, of course, we are based in the heart of Southeast Asia. This research and related case studies are extremely important for us to improve and develop our curriculum so that we can provide effective guidance to our students. And I would like to encourage in the future, as in the spirit of the mission and vision of both TCI Network and MOC Asian chapter, to have more and more documentation of cluster cases and cases here in Asia. The case studies are a very effective, useful, and practical tool that we can use in the classroom for educational purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. It's my honor and pleasure to be here with you today and to support you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Casey, and thank you for that introduction. And I think that the lessons we hear of the research, the building of case studies here locally and applicable to Asia are something that we are really focusing on here in our networks. And I think that that hopefully will be the theme of today, amongst other things. Could I pass on back to Patricia, perhaps, to introduce our next speaker, Madawet. So, Patricia.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Casey, for your words. Indeed, we need to gather more cases on Asia and show them to the world. I think they are interesting for everyone. Actually, we have registered many people from all over the world from the TCI network. I'm sure they will follow the recording afterwards, from Latin America, from Oceania, where Midiana is connecting from, also from Australia, from North America, from Africa, where we're going to have our global conference this year. So indeed, that's the aim of TCI, and we will work on that. Thank you for pushing us. Our next speaker is known already by all of you. She's the president of the TCI network, and she also represents a Cluster Excellence Denmark. So she is very much in top of the global agenda of clusters, and is the right person to bring us some of the global trends that we see on clusters. So Merete, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Ken. Thank you for the warm welcome, Casey, as well. It's great that we could organize this conference for a second year. I hope for next year, let's hope for a more physical event. In Copenhagen, where I live, we have the Tour de France, and just going around Copenhagen yesterday was, having this kind of big international gatherings again. So let's hope for a physical event in Asia sometime next year. I think we need that on top of all the cases. Fully agree that we need to keep on documenting and learning from what is happening around clusters. Yeah, so let me share a bit some of the trends we are hearing from the global community. I hope you can see my slides. People are nodding. Yeah, great. Perfect. Because, I mean, we tried, so many things are happening. We thought we were out of the pandemic. Now we have the aggression in Ukraine, and we see a lot of the climate changes as well. So the cluster agenda is definitely changing a lot, and we try to keep track and to see what is happening and to understand the role of clusters in that. So for the new ones listening in, I mean, clusters is not exactly rocket science. It's something that is around. It's basically a group of related companies that has a specific sectoral focus. This might be in life science or in food, or I noticed there's a Kashmir cluster in Mongolia. So that's a new one for me, but that's very nice to see as well. And they've basically been around always. I mean, companies, they tend to group to manage different challenges. So this is not something that we invented in modern times. But what we've seen over the years is that now more and more partners seek those collaborative platforms. We talk about the triple helix structure. We talked about for many years, you know, the researchers, the knowledge institutions, the companies, and the public sector. But what we see today is that ecosystems are increasingly becoming more and more complex. So we see now investors and financials actually seeking these cluster collaborations, and we see more of the business organizations. And basically we see that they need to collaborate to tackle the many challenges that we face, and we need neutral facilitators, we need platforms to tackle the challenges, and we see the ones that manage these platforms, the cluster organizations, the cluster initiatives, here the cluster managers play a key role. And I think comparing to other kind of leadership roles, this is a very challenging management role and something that we need to keep on exploring as well, and where we need to support the cluster managers in their different management challenges and tasks. Yeah, so we see more and more cluster organizations arising as well. I think currently we estimate we have around 8,000 of those cluster organization, cluster hubs, or whatever we call them. And we see that many of them over the years have initiated more and more cross-border collaboration. Normally you start with your own region, you find a neighboring cluster organizations and start a collaboration with them. You want to export more, you want to start a research project, but then, you know, it tends to develop from there, and the world has become a lot smaller over the last couple of years. And now when we see those patterns of collaboration, this is really across the world collaboration that we're seeing. And the trend is also, it's shifted a bit from, you know, classical exports collaboration more into using each other as, you know, scouting for new trends, scouting for intelligence. So for instance, like in aviation, clusters in aviation group together and use each other as a way of testing ideas, testing projects and collaborating. And of course, the pandemic has made it easier because now everybody are world experts in all of these online tools. And we have also needed it more because the clusters have really tried to help all of those disruptions in the value chains that just, you know, keep on to be our daily challenges. I think basically it seems like all value chains are disrupted. So there's a huge need for cluster organizations, cluster management to try and help to find new ways of you know, what are the new value chains and how can we collaborate with the new places around the world. Yeah, and on this topic of clusters matter, it's something we discuss a lot in TCI network because while clusters might have been around always, it's still like a bit not the most common terminology or concept. So there's been over the years put a huge effort into different ways of documenting the value of clusters. And the European Cluster Collaboration Platform, we have the Commission with me later on. They have actually really put together a huge bunch of data and information and analysis. So again, in terms of documenting, Casey, there's a lot of very nice material there, and I can only encourage anybody interested in this agenda to follow the platform, register for the newsletter, because they have done a lot in documenting, clusters matter, it raises productivity, there's a growth in productivity, there's a growth in innovation, there's a growth in skills. So it's a long list of benefits. And there's just recently sent out this panorama late last year. Again, what is happening around clusters and what is the value of clusters in relation to the many challenges that we have. But in TCI, we of course also ask our community. So for the ones not knowing TCI, we are a global community. We go back 25 years. We have 500 active members in 110 countries. So they really know what is happening. So once every year we ask what is happening, and we get a lot of very nice feedback. And this improving collaboration is really one of the key messages coming out. So both improving collaboration within the clusters, and also then perhaps experiment with smaller sub-clusters within some of the established cluster organizations on specific topics. So if you're in the food sector, there might be an interest in looking into more of those, plant-based proteins that we see is really developing a lot. And there's, all of these virtual interactions, some of that is working nicely, but we also like a bit the personal touch. So how do we make that working in a nice way? And how do we ensure that collaboration is still helping to make the clusters grow? And we also in TCI, we talk about the power of collaboration, and we also know about the power of people, because basically clusters are about people grouping together, bringing people in, and sometimes it's more efficient. We can have the right investments or the right instruments, but basically bringing people around the table and having a good discussion on, the challenges is really some of the things we see in the best cluster organizations, how important that it is. And we are quite interested in this, what is then the best practice of the governance, because you can see as ecosystems become more complex, then we need a more focus on the leadership skills, and we need to share those skills to everybody working on this agenda. And the topic of inclusiveness and gender is also really high. I think is an area that's suffered a lot during the pandemic. Some areas of the world is quite severely hit on this topic, and it's high on policy agendas, especially in Africa, where we have a global conference later in the year. How do we ensure more inclusive economic development? And how do we also involve the civil society and perhaps work on more missions that we have a common challenge, and how do we engage better with that? And on the topic of power of people, I know Mijana is in the program later on, but I think you put it very nicely, Mijana, early in the year when I also asked the community, why do we have clusters? Why are clusters still very relevant in the modern age? And you said that, clusters are about people. It's a social glue where we strengthen collaboration and cooperation and have this purpose, common purpose, where we really want to bring in businesses, regions, communities, and the counties. And another topic that is really one of the trends we're seeing is the transition. So it's never dull working in the cluster agenda, and it's a multiple source of challenges we're facing. We had also a series of Green Labs with Tony from Taiwan and great discussions on how do we support SMEs in those transitions, because I think in general, the SMEs we're working with, they are quite similar. They don't have the times, they don't have the skills, and they will need help in transforming and changing over the years. So how do we encourage that, or how do we incorporate that in the cluster calls, so the clusters understand this is a common challenge? How do we help the SMEs on that? And how do we also encourage more? How do we demonstrate the benefits of that? And we see that there's still an ongoing discussion on this topic of skilled labor. I think it's a classic in many of the cluster organizations. We see that some of them are really focused a lot over the years on competence development and bringing, skills to the next level. But it's an ongoing thing and something where we are in many countries actually short of on labor, qualified labor. So how do we bring the skilled labor to the next level? And then on top of the cluster organization, we have more and more of this, building more and more cross-sectoral bridges. So linking clusters across sectors. We saw a lot also during the pandemic, life science clusters working with digital clusters, and trying to tackle those challenges I mentioned on sustainability, digital transition, or how do we also work with cities and regions. So us working with clusters, we talk about cluster organizations, cluster initiatives, like it's common knowledge, but we also see that, there are many new forms and names popping up, innovation platform, hubs, nodes, networks, and basically they try a bit to address the same challenges, about system innovation, collaboration, how do we experiment, how can we change the systems to address some of the social challenges we are facing. Yeah, and flooding is definitely on the topic. We have our global conference in Durban in November. Patricia and I went to see and plan the conference some months ago, and we basically just came back, and then terrible pictures coming out from Durban, the worst flooding in 30, 50 years, 500 people unfortunately killed, and a lot of important infrastructure being ruined. And I think this broad understanding, we need to collaborate to tackle the challenges we're facing and the challenges of tomorrow, where we need each other on this, joining together, creating common intelligence and finding new common solutions as well. And that, of course, also leads to policies and analysis. We see many countries taking, initiatives of both mapping the clusters that are out there. Sometimes we know some of it, but doing like a proper cluster mapping is quite important, something that where the MOC network is quite, the experts. And I can only recommend to do that kind of mapping exercise to really understand the strongholds of any economy. And how do you then work with emerging value chains? How to activate it? And how do you then build a cluster policy on top of that and encourage cluster development in your setting? And sometimes you need to even, bring in more policies, like other people working with digital transformation or entrepreneurship or research and innovation. And you need sometimes then to explain the value of clusters to other policymakers. So again, some new trends and a lot of complexity in tackling that. So in order to help a bit our members, we did this policy roadmap a year ago to map, I say, at least there's 6 basic elements you need to think about if you're building your first strategy or first cluster policy. And the first thing is really to set the right objectives, because sometimes I talk to people and say, yeah, we want to build a cluster policy, and say, well, no, you want to find the right objectives. You need to find out what is it that you want your cluster policy to tackle. So you need to prepare, you need to map, you need to analyze in a very solid way. Then you need to find out how do you work with the clusters, because it can be a bother to work with private entities outside the ministry. So how do you create a joint cluster community between the cluster organization and the support agency? And you should think about different types of support. It's not just enough with funding. You should think about, cluster events, cluster training, cluster webinars. And you should also think about highlighting the role of clusters, like Casey mentioned already, that we need more stories. We need to document it. We need to bring it out there into the public. and we need to strengthen the connections around the clusters. I work in Denmark. We're quite good on clusters. When I started my work 10 years ago, we're a small country with 5 million people. The cluster organizations in Denmark, they didn't know each other. So strengthen the clusters, collaboration, strengthen the connections around them. And then in the end, we need to monitor, we need to evaluate, we need to show this is working. And we also need to detect when it's not working, so we can adapt the programs. So the final slide is thinking more globally, bigger is definitely a trend. And again, I think the clusters have been moving a lot forward on this. In the early days of the pandemic, there was this tendency of going local or regionally. But I think many of the clusters said, no, we still need to collaborate. We're still a global value chain community. And we need to think about how do we create new networks of clusters? How can we look to super clusters and how have they built their strategies? And how have they created better links to both smaller companies and bigger companies? So I think these were and some of the larger trends we're seeing from the community, something we will also work more on for the conference in Durban. So you got a sneak peek into our new global trend analysis that and as Patricia always say, be careful what you say, because if you say something very nice, we might pick you for a case. So please encourage again to bring more cases so we can also embed them and integrate this in this trend analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariette. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Shall I come? Can I say a brief couple of words on the MOC Asian chapter, because we are, as we chair the Asian chapter, and we've been running since 2014, the Asian chapter, and our collaboration with TCI Network has really built us a whole new group of friends and colleagues and fostered this idea of collaboration. Because Mariette mentioned it very much, and Casey mentioned it very much, about the building of case studies, that we have a very good partnership between the academic and the practical. And I think we all want to learn from each other. And this is why our summer conference is so important to us, and a platform upon which we really feel we can build. And as the MOC Asian chapter, our message has always been collaboration, to build the networks, to build the social capital between us. As Mariette said, 10 years ago, the cluster organizations didn't know each other, perhaps, but in the same way, we have done a lot to actually build the links between the various countries who are part of the MOC, and we've had conferences in Taiwan and in Indonesia and in the Philippines and here in Cambodia, and we have done a huge amount with our friends in places like Kazakhstan and India and Australia, and we are really building. So let's continue that on all the lessons that we need to learn, and we're looking forward. Having built this platform, we're really looking forward to a good collaborative future between us as a network in teaching, in research, and, as we say, building the case studies. That's our next objective. So, okay.